I stood in that courtroom with no lawyer beside me, and my husband's entire family laughed. She can't even afford a parking ticket. His brother sneered. Everyone agreed. Everyone was so sure until the judge looked past me straight at my husband's attorney and asked, "You really don't recognize her?" My husband's face went white as paper. Trevor's arrogant smirk vanished. A heavy, suffocating silence slammed into the room, sucking the oxygen right out of the air. The mocking chuckles from my mother-in-law choked off in her throat. They all stared at me. Really stared. For the first time in 6 years. They were not looking at the pathetic, invisible woman they thought they could crush. They were looking at their own executioner. His high-priced lawyer fumbled with his thick stack of files. His hands actually trembled. A heavy gold pen slipped from his grip and clattered against the polished mahogany table. It was the loudest sound in the courtroom. Trevor swallowed hard. The vein in his neck pulsed rapidly. He opened his mouth, desperately trying to assert his dominance like he always did. But his voice completely failed him. He sat there, entirely paralyzed. They built their entire reality on lies, stolen money, and unbearable cruelty. They mistook my patience for cowardice. They thought they had buried me alive. But you cannot bury someone who is already holding the shovel. To understand exactly how Trevor Hayes orchestrated his own absolute ruin, you have to go back. Back to the sweltering evening he threw my little girl's security blanket into the garbage. The heat in Phoenix, Arizona, was suffocating that November evening. The desert air felt thick, heavy with the promise of a storm that would never break. I parked my used sedan in the sweeping driveway of our Spanish-style villa. I had spent $400,000 of my own savings to secretly rescue this house from foreclosure 2 years ago, filtering the money through a blind trust just so Trevor could maintain his illusion of being the sole provider. It was our 6th wedding anniversary. I was 34 years old, playing the role of Alyssa Carter, a quiet, $45,000 a year data entry clerk. Trevor loved my smallness. He thrived on my supposed mediocrity. I unlocked the heavy oak door, expecting the scent of catered dinner or expensive wine. Instead, the sharp, toxic stench of industrial plastic hit the back of my throat. Heavy black garbage bags blocked the foyer, 6 of them, piled haphazardly against the imported tile. Trevor leaned against the kitchen island, a crystal glass of amber liquid in his hand, wearing his tailored charcoal suit. Beside him stood Vanessa Brooks. She was 28, a sleek interior designer with a predatory smile, holding the leash to my 9-year-old adopted daughter's small rescue dog. My chest tightened. I stepped toward the bags. One had split open, spilling my plain work blouses onto the floor. But right on top, tossed like worthless trash, was a faded yellow security blanket. Ivy's blanket. The one she had clung to every single night since I pulled her out of a shattered foster home. Trevor took a slow sip of his bourbon. He looked at me the way a king looks at a peasant tracking mud onto his floors. "Vanessa is moving in," he stated, his voice flat and completely devoid of empathy. "You need to pack up the rest of your trash and be gone before midnight." He reached into his breast pocket, pulled out a folded slip of paper, and flicked it across the granite counter. $15,000. Trevor sneered, watching the check slide toward the edge. "Consider it a charity settlement. My lawyers structured the deed on this house years ago. I hold sole legal ownership. You get exactly what you brought into this marriage. Nothing." Vanessa let out a sharp, grating laugh. She looked down at my worn shoes, then shifted her gaze to Ivy, who was shrinking against the doorframe, her tiny shoulders trembling. "Grab your baggage and get out." "Alyssa," Trevor said, pointing his glass directly at my daughter. "I'm done funding your pathetic little life. Leave the dog. Vanessa likes him." I locked my jaw so hard my teeth ached. I swallowed the burning bile in my throat. I knelt down, picked up the yellow blanket from the dirtied floor, and handed it to Ivy. I wrapped my fingers around her small, shaking hand. We turned our backs on them and walked out into the sweltering desert night, leaving the check sitting on the counter. The heavy wooden door slammed shut behind us. Trevor thought my silence was cowardice. He thought I was just another broken woman taking his abuse, too terrified to speak. For 6 years, he engineered a reality where I was entirely dependent on him, mistaking his loud arrogance for true power and my stillness for pure stupidity. He made a fatal miscalculation. When you spend your entire career hunting America's most ruthless and bloodthirsty financial predators, you learn how to become completely invisible. I am a senior supervisory special agent for the FBI Financial Crimes Unit. I wasn't cowering in that house. I was quietly mapping every single illegal offshore wire transfer he made. I wasn't enduring his cruelty. I was meticulously weaving a federal net. And tonight, he had just marched right into the center of it. I tucked Ivy into a sagging twin bed at a nameless motel off the interstate. Her small fingers gripped the faded yellow blanket, her breathing finally slowing into a deep sleep. I stood by the cracked window, watching the desert wind whip sand across the empty parking lot. My chest was a tight drum of rage. I unzipped the false bottom of my canvas duffel bag and pulled out my encrypted federal comm link. The dense plastic shell felt heavy and familiar in my palm. One secure call to my FBI task force director. I dropped the timid wife routine instantly, my voice dropping an octave into pure command. I ordered a level 4 financial sweep on Trevor Hayes. I fed them his hidden Cayman Islands routing numbers. The team needed 12 hours to pull the final ledgers. I hung up the device and let the silence fill the room. The net was closing. The next morning, the brutal Arizona sun baked the asphalt as I drove back to the Hayes estate. Ivy needed her spare asthma inhaler left in the upstairs bathroom. I walked up the sweeping paved driveway. Barbara Reynolds waited in the arched doorway. Trevor's mother wore pristine silk at 9 in the morning, her neck weighed down by heavy diamonds. She blocked the entrance, crossing her arms like a sentinel guarding a fortress. Her lips curled into a familiar, venomous sneer. She called me a pathetic stray. She said Trevor had finally realized I was nothing more than an uneducated charity case polluting their wealthy bloodline. I locked eyes with her. I let this blistering heat beat down on my neck. I clamped my jaw shut and offered her absolute silence. Let her think her cruel words were drawing blood. Let her bask in her fragile superiority. Arrogance always blinds a person to the cliff right in front of them. I pushed past her shoulder into the grand hallway. The air inside smelled like expensive lemon polish and stale gin. Before I even reached the spiral staircase, a cold hand grabbed my elbow and pulled me into the shadowed alcove by the library. It was Courtney, Trevor's sister-in-law. Her eyes darted frantically toward the open front door. Courtney had spent 10 years shrinking under the weight of the Hayes family's endless emotional abuse, playing the obedient wife to Trevor's brother. Her hands shook violently, but she pressed a small metal flash drive into my palm. She whispered that she had photographed the inside of Trevor's biometric safe, images of sealed courier envelopes with Cayman Islands return addresses. She looked me dead in the eye, her voice suddenly steady. She was done being their collateral damage. She knew I was planning something, and she wanted to watch them burn. I closed my fist around the cold metal drive, an alliance forged in the dark. By noon, the final pieces of the puzzle snapped together. I called Trevor's attorney and formally requested an emergency mediation session for that afternoon. I forced a tremor into my voice over the phone. I begged for a quick, quiet resolution to prepare. I pulled a faded, oversized sweater from my motel bag. I scrubbed my face dry with a harsh towel to make my eyes look red, exhausted, and utterly defeated. I needed to look like a desperate, terrified mother clinging to the very edge of a cliff. Trevor fed on weakness. His ego was a massive, bottomless pit, and I was about to hand him the biggest shovel he had ever seen. The boardroom in downtown Phoenix was a fortress of glass, steel, and suffocating arrogance. The air conditioning blasted a steady, freezing current, a sharp contrast to the blistering desert heat outside. Trevor sat at the head of the massive mahogany table like a king holding court. Vanessa clung to his arm, wearing a designer dress that cost more than my fabricated yearly salary. Beside them sat their aggressive defense attorney, a man who sneered openly at my cheap, oversized sweater and scuffed shoes. I hunched my shoulders. I let my chin drop toward my chest. I forced my hands to shake as I pulled out my chair. I needed them to see a broken, terrified woman completely out of her depth. "Please, Trevor," I whispered, forcing a pathetic tremor into my voice. "Ivy needs a stable home. 15,000 won't even cover first and last month's rent in a safe neighborhood. Just a little more. Please." Vanessa rolled her eyes, letting out a heavy, exaggerated sigh. Trevor leaned back in his plush leather chair, steepling his fingers. He looked at me with pure, unadulterated disgust. "You are pathetic, Alyssa," he sneered, his voice echoing off the glass walls. "You contributed absolutely nothing to my empire. You deserve nothing. Take the charity check or starve." I unzipped my faded canvas bag. I pulled out a single sheet of paper, a standard affidavit of financial disclosure, and pushed it across the polished wood. "If you just swear on paper you aren't hiding any money," I pleaded, letting a single tear slip down my cheek. "I'll take the 15,000. I'll sign your waiver. You will never see us again." His lawyer immediately slammed a flat palm over the paper. "Absolutely not. Do not sign unverified documents." But Trevor scoffed. He looked at me, then at Vanessa, relishing his absolute dominance. His ego simply could not resist the chance to humiliate me one last time. "It's a generic internet form," Trevor mocked, snatching the paper out from under his lawyer's hand. "She actually thinks I have secret millions buried in the desert. If scribbling my name gets this parasite out of my life today, I'm doing it." He grabbed his heavy gold pen. He signed his name with a violent, arrogant flourish, legally swearing under oath that he possessed 0 hidden assets. The court notary sitting beside us pressed her stamp into the bottom corner. A sharp, heavy thud. I blinked. The tears vanished instantly. I squared my shoulders. I sat up straight, planting my feet firmly on the carpet. The temperature in the room seemed to plummet. Trevor's smug grin faltered. I reached into my bag again. I pulled out the thick, bound stack of Cayman Islands wire transfer logs and threw them onto the center of the table. They hit the wood with a heavy smack. "You just committed federal perjury, Trevor," I said. My voice was no longer small, it was ice. "And massive money laundering. I am Senior Supervisory Special Agent Alyssa Carter, FBI Financial Crimes Unit. Your accounts are frozen. Your offshore shells are completely dismantled." Trevor's face drained of color. Vanessa gasped, shrinking back into her chair. But his lawyer scrambled. Driven by sheer panic, he ripped open his briefcase and slapped a court document onto the table, pointing a shaking finger at my face. "Nice try," the lawyer spat, sweat beading on his forehead. "But I have a signed Maricopa County eviction and trespass order right here. You are harassing my client. I am having local police arrest you for extortion in exactly 2 minutes." He thought he had me cornered. He thought his local corruption could outpace a federal net. I simply leaned forward and tapped the golden seal printed at the top of his document. "You paid a clerk to backdate a fake order," I said, my tone dead flat. "But you forgot one tiny detail. Maricopa County changed its official seal 4 years ago. This paper has the old logo." The lawyer froze. The blood rushed from his face. He looked down at the obsolete logo, his mouth opening and closing like a suffocating fish. The trap was locked. The heavy glass doors burst open. 3 U.S. Marshals stepped into the room. I ignored them. I kept my eyes locked entirely on Trevor. A thick, oily sweat broke out across his forehead. His jaw slacked. The arrogant king of real estate was gone. He was just a terrified man staring at the absolute destruction of his life. "Trevor Hayes, you are under federal arrest." He tried to stand. His knees buckled instantly. He collapsed back into the leather chair. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He couldn't even breathe. Vanessa scrambled backward. Her chair tipped over, sending her crashing hard to the carpet. She held up her shaking hands, screaming that she was just a designer, that she had nothing to do with his offshore accounts. "Your signature is on 42 fraudulent contracts," the lead marshal stated flatly. The steel handcuffs clicked shut around her wrists. Then they snapped around Trevor's. That sharp, metallic click echoed off the glass walls. It was the sound of absolute closure. 2 hours later, the federal sweep hit the Hayes estate. I stood by the command vehicle and watched the empire crumble. Barbara Reynolds stood in the center of her sweeping paved driveway. Her pristine silk blouse was wrinkled and soaked with sweat. She sobbed uncontrollably as federal agents hitched her luxury cars to tow trucks. Every single asset purchased with laundered money was seized. Her high society friends were already blocking her number. She was bankrupt. Up on the grand porch, out of the blazing sun, Courtney Mitchell stood holding a steaming mug of tea. She wore a simple dress and a calm, genuine smile. She had handed over the flash drive. She had secured total immunity for herself. She watched her tyrannical mother-in-law weep, raised her mug toward me in a silent toast, and walked back inside to pack her bags. She was finally free. I left them in the desert dust. I drove straight to the federal building. I took the secure elevator up to the 40th floor. I stripped off the faded, oversized sweater and tossed it into a trash can near the entrance. The pathetic data entry clerk ceased to exist. I walked onto the floor of the Financial Crimes Unit. My task force director gave a sharp nod. The junior analysts stood up straight. I was Senior Supervisory Special Agent Carter, and my desk was exactly how I left it. 3 weeks later, the brutal Arizona heat finally broke. A cool, gentle breeze swept through the backyard of the Spanish-style villa. The deed was now entirely in my name, scrubbed clean of Trevor's toxic grip. Smoke curled from the grill. I flipped a row of burgers, the sizzling meat mixing with loud, genuine laughter. Ivy chased her small rescue dog across the bright green lawn. She clutched her yellow security blanket in one hand, completely carefree. She wasn't shrinking into corners anymore. She was safe. Courtney sat at the patio table, pouring fresh lemonade into glass pitchers. She was officially divorced and managing a local nonprofit. We had built our own family from the wreckage of theirs. I leaned against the stone counter. I took a deep breath. No more hiding. No more shrinking to protect a weak man's fragile ego. The war was over, and we had won. The justice system moves slowly, but when it finally crushes you, it leaves absolutely nothing behind. 7 months after the federal raid, Trevor Hayes stood in a federal courtroom wearing a bright orange jumpsuit, completely stripped of his tailored suits and his towering ego. The trial was brutally swift. His own accountants flipped on him the minute the FBI threatened them with conspiracy charges. The judge looked down from the bench and called his actions a masterclass in pathetic greed. He sentenced Trevor to 84 months in a federal penitentiary for perjury, wire fraud, and money laundering. The federal system offers zero early parole. The court also ordered restitution of $4.2 million, wiping out everything he had ever built. Vanessa tried to cut a plea deal, weeping uncontrollably on the stand and claiming she was manipulated by a powerful man. The judge saw right through her tears and gave her 36 months. Her interior design license was permanently revoked by the state board. Barbara Reynolds escaped a prison sentence, but her punishment was arguably worse for a woman who worshipped social status. The federal government seized her sprawling estate, her luxury cars, and her hidden offshore accounts. The Phoenix Country Club quietly expelled her. Her wealthy friends instantly stopped answering her calls, erasing her from their social registry. She now lives in a tiny two-bedroom apartment on the edge of town, completely isolated, surrounded only by the cheap plastic furniture she used to mock. Toxic people always believe they hold the reins. They constantly think there is one last string they can pull to drag you back into their chaos. A few weeks ago, a thick white envelope arrived in my mailbox, stamped by the federal prison system. It was a 6-page handwritten letter from Trevor. He spent the first 5 pages talking about his own profound suffering, complaining bitterly about the terrible food, the cramped cell, and the absolute lack of respect from the guards who refused to treat him like a senior executive. In the final paragraph, he tried to play the ultimate victim. He wrote that he had given me the best years of his life, that I had destroyed a beautiful family over a simple financial misunderstanding, and that if I truly loved Ivy, I would put $2,000 into his prison commissary account. He actually wrote that he forgave me for overreacting. I stood at my kitchen counter, tracing the frantic, desperate slant of his handwriting. My chest felt completely hollow of any sympathy. The emotional hold he once had on me was entirely dead. I folded the letter in half, slid it into the paper shredder, and listened to the satisfying mechanical hum of the steel blades turning his arrogant words into worthless confetti. I poured myself a hot cup of coffee and walked out the back door. The desert mornings are incredibly beautiful when you finally learn to breathe freely in your own home. I sat on the back porch of the villa that is now fully, legally mine, watching the sunrise paint the vast Arizona sky in brilliant shades of gold and violet. The heavy, suffocating tension that used to infect every room of this house is entirely gone. Ivy was already awake, sitting on a bright picnic blanket in the cool morning grass with her rescue dog. She was throwing a tennis ball, laughing out loud. It was a loud, uninhibited, joyful sound that filled the entire yard. She finally dropped the heavy shield of her trauma, stepping fully into the certainty that she is safe. Courtney drove up the driveway a few minutes later, bringing a box of fresh pastries from the local bakery downtown. We sat at the patio table and spent the morning finalizing the operational budget for our new nonprofit. We created an organization dedicated to helping trapped women untangle their hidden finances from abusive partners, using my forensic skills to trace hidden assets. We built a real, thriving family out of the toxic ashes of a fake one. Blood demands loyalty to mean anything, and a wedding ring gives absolutely no one the right to erase your identity. Loyalty, safety, and mutual respect are the only things that make a family real. When you spend years shrinking yourself to fit into the dark shadow of an arrogant person, you start to believe their volume equals their power. You internalize their cruelty and mistake your own patience for weakness. But true power speaks softly. It anchors itself in quiet certainty, completely bypassing the need to belittle a child just to feel tall. If you ever find yourself trapped in a room with someone who mistakes your quiet endurance for stupidity, there are 3 rules you must remember to survive and escape. Rule number 1 is about silence. Silence is the most lethal weapon you possess in a war against a narcissist. Keep your ammunition hidden when they mock your clothes, when they try to tear down your confidence. Let them talk. Let their massive ego convince them that they have already won the game. Toxic people will always dig their own graves if you simply hand them the shovel, nod quietly, and step back. Your silence is a meticulously calculated strategy. Rule number 2 is about the illusion of wealth. Money is merely a tool, offering no substitute for actual character. The people who flaunt their social status the loudest, the ones who use their heavy bank accounts to bully the vulnerable and impress strangers, are almost always the most desperate souls in the room. They build towering fortresses of designer clothes, luxury cars, and exclusive memberships because they are absolutely terrified someone will realize how entirely empty they are on the inside. When the accounts inevitably hit zero, their entire identity evaporates into thin air. Rule number 3 is about true protection. You must completely refuse to fight a narcissist on their toxic level. Save your breath instead of screaming back. Keep your silence instead of explaining your worth to someone deeply committed to misunderstanding you. You simply need to gather the unassailable facts. True protection operates in the quiet, steady confidence of knowing exactly who you are, what you are worth, and having the undeniable, legally binding receipts to prove it. The greatest revenge in life requires refusing to dedicate your energy to ruining someone else's life. The greatest revenge is absolute, undeniable competence. It is walking away from the wreckage with your dignity perfectly intact, your boundaries made of steel, and your freedom permanently secured. You are always allowed to walk away from people who hurt you, regardless of who they are or what title they hold. I am Alyssa Carter, and I am finally free. Have you ever had to quietly outsmart a narcissist who thought you were completely powerless? How did you set your trap and reclaim your life? Share your story in the comments below.